Zain, you won the Young Lions uh, book award this year for 2023.
Yes, I did. And
Yes, you
it
did.
was quite it was quite a night.
Usually I get to be there for that night, and I was not able to be there this year, so I'm sorry that I missed it. But I was talking to my husband who was there, and he mentioned that you have quite a relationship with the library.
I
Or
do.
yeah.
Yeah.
What is what is that story? I mean, obviously it's a beautiful building, it's an incredible institution. So many people have interesting relationship with that building and with the library in general.
I think I grew up in for a little while in Stapleton, Staten Island, and that was my first library. And that became it was one room that comprised pretty much all of the sort of Western canon. So there's a lot of Faulkner, there was a lot of um, Joyce, Beckett, that sort of thing. And I read those far too early because of that library. And the librarians were like, "You're never going to understand this." And then like I became aroused upon reading Henry Miller, and that's not good. And that's there's also that problem.
That's a
Uh,
whole other interview.
yeah, yeah, it was my burgeoning. It was a burgeoning. As a teenager, you're just like, wow, this is overtly sexual. But I mentioned it that night. The library is where I met, Martin Amis and Cormac McCarthy, who were both passed. But it is also where I watched people indulge their darkest sexual fantasies on public computers. And I think that it's a perfect it became a communal space in a way for me that I adored. And librarians were the first conduit to literature for me. And there aren't that many bookstores on Staten Island.
Mm.
And at the time, the Stapleton Library was just four walls, really. And after my after my book was published, I went to the Stapleton Library, and I I mean, it received quite a glow up. It is gorgeous now, and I wish I had had it. And then I found my book next to like a hero of mine, Laszlo Krasner-Horkai, and I was owing only to the alphabet, but but it was inspiring, and I don't and I there was a time where I was housing unstable, and I would use the library kind of as a place to stay. Uh, and it was where I just found the library closest as I mentioned this also that night, to the both like the library closest to the bodega with the best sandwich, and would just make
Wow.
and would set up shop for hours. And it cultivated my love of writing and reading. And like, if reading is where I put my writing, then the library is invaluable. I can't imagine. I don't think anybody becomes a writer without a library.
Yeah. Holy cow. I mean, what an incredible relationship over a long period of time for different reasons with the library. Was there someone who encouraged you to go? It's like I try to think back for me, like I
Mm.
loved our public library as well in Arlington Heights, Illinois. It's just like I was spent a lot of time there as well. But I think my parents definitely pointed me in that direction. Was there someone in your life that was kind of leading you there, or was it something that just kind of called to you?
I think it was a little bit of I think it was a function of I just didn't want to uh it was on my way to the ferry,
Okay.
and it was the only place really like where somebody with my proclivities could go and kind of feel I don't want to say safe, but safe in some ways. It wasn't really somebody, but then the librarians, Mrs. Joris, I remember her really well. She was a
Oh,
cantankerous Greek woman, and she she turned me on to later the Names, which was a book about it was a Don DeLillo book about a man who goes like a someone who goes to Greece and doesn't see the Acropolis. And she's like, don't be this kind of American. And I always remember that. And she would always find these books, and like if I would read one writer, she's like, oh, that's, if you like this, you'll like that. Like she was my sort of Sherpa, if you
Yeah, I was gonna
will.
say she was like your guide through
Yeah,
literature. That's amazing. And
yeah.
Mrs. Joris, is that what you said
Mrs.
her name?
Joris, yeah.
That's amazing. How
Yeah.
incredible. Wow, I wish I had a Mrs. Joris back then. I feel like I was just blindly pulling books off the shelf, not knowing what I was doing.
What was the first book that you found, like, do you remember reading in the library? Like, what was the one that like
You,
stands out?
you know what stands out? Not so much as like the first one I remember reading, because I remember being really little. We had like kids programs at the library where I was reading little monster books. And there was like monster books, and there were little the happy people books. I mean, I'm talking like little. I was probably 5 years old, but as more of like a normal teenage reader, I remember just really being impacted by the importance of being earnest. I was reading a lot of plays because I was already
Oh
acting at the
yeah.
time. And so it was like, it was the first time that I was reading something where I was so aware that someone was so intentional. I think up until that point, I was probably about like 12 or 13 when I was reading that. Up until that point, to me, books were these sort of magical things that just appeared that I hadn't really thought about,
Mm,
structure and process and storytelling and what question are you asking, and you know what I mean? Like I wasn't thinking that way about literature yet. And so it was the first time that I was reading something where I was like, oh, this is intentionally clever, and this is intentionally funny,
yeah.
and like all of these things had to be laid out and mapped out for it to all add up to this thing. And I was just sort of, I don't know, I was very seduced by its intentionality and the magic that it was able to create
Right.
for me, the reader. You know what I mean? So that was the first time I was like, oh, I really love this. And that was a very clear memory for me.
Yeah, I think the distance between the writer and the reader is always either like I think some writers are intentionally at a large, like have more rope between them and the reader, and I
Mm,
think that some writers are want to bring you as close as possible, and I think that both can be brilliant, and like one can expect the reader uh come closer, and others draw you in. And I wondered, I think as we get older, we're willing to travel further to meet the writer where they are.
mm.
um and I think that I wonder, like, the play actually is interesting, like it is an interesting form. I was just reading Betrayal, but very different than The Importance of Being Earnest, but Betrayal by Harold Pinter, and
Yeah,
it's like could not be further
yeah,
from
very
but
different.
yeah, the play is almost, it dispenses with all of the prose writing and the description, and it almost immediately colonizes you a little bit,
Mm.
like, because they embody you, and then you speak through them, which I imagine as an actor that's kind of um difficult at times depending on the work.
It's definitely interesting. I mean, I mentioned earlier that it was Arlington Heights, Illinois, where I grew up, which was a really safe, very wholesome place to grow up. But part of the intrigue of the library and in the intrigue of plays and theater and acting was to get to feel like the world was so much bigger than this place, that there were so many people that I had never met. There were so many ideas I had never experienced. There were so many concepts that were so much bigger than where I was. And I think theater and plays and all of that for me was exactly what you're talking about, of like sort of being invited into these people who were doing things I had never done or may not ever do, or thinking things I had never thought, or it's a really it can be really challenging, but it can also be really invigorating because you start to think in a way that you wouldn't think for yourself, right? It's a lot of what I was really compelled by with Brother Alive, with your book, which we will talk about the book. I'm sorry, we won't just not talk
That's fine.
about the
No,
book,
we could
but
just not. It's fine. Totally fine by me. I
you might be sick of talking about
have
the book, so but but because I don't know a tremendous about Muslim culture. And so it was like, for me to be able to really experience these characters and like put myself in their shoes and really like imagine what that room above the mosque felt like, and imagine what the being in Saudi Arabia would feel like. There was so much depth and detail to how all of that was described, and that I felt like I got to just step into this world in a way where I learned so much and experienced something I've never experienced before. Truly, like I've never read something that gave me that immersive of an experience of the Muslim culture in many different ways, good, bad, everything in between, you know. So it's interesting because I think, yes, plays ask you to do that, but I think you found a way to ask people to do that in your novel as well.
Yeah, I think it's a lens like I think that it's a little like photography. Like you kind
Mm,
of have to like photography naturally creates a miniature or decontextualizes life, and whereas the novel kind of tries to take that photographic lens and recontextualize it, um and you crop, you blow up, you warp, you distort, you do all
mm,
of these things to create to not necessarily mimesis, not necessarily a one-to-one reality. Like it's that's why I kind of I think a lot of literature kind of accedes to journalism, and I don't think that that's necessarily a good place for it to live, because I think it has to be you have to kind of use the crush of the specific,
mm.
and 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 that crushing specificity is important. Like if you think about there's no one else who could have written like Malloy or The Unnameable or White Noise or any of these
Yeah,
or Americana, but like there are all these books that have very specific. Like Philip Roth is natural. He's Jewish. Like that is he is no like
right.
there is there is an importance to specificity. And I actually, in my next book, I'm kind of avoiding that specificity differently, but um, I'm I've always wondered what the balance is between immersion and appropriation of the person reading it, and so you kind of
Hmm.
want to give enough space for the reader to dance with you as opposed to
Yeah.
leading them too much. And that's they have to be given the room to waltz a little
It's
bit.
a really beautiful way to put it. And it makes me think about actually, is it part two when you go into the letter from Imam Salim? And so
Yep.
I found myself just blown away when it pivoted into that letter, just because I didn't expect to take such a deep dive into the darker corners of what someone has done. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it was so fascinating to be in the internal life of someone who externally might be doing things that come off not great, you know, in certain moments.
Yeah.
But
Indoctrinating people, committing
right.
sexual assaults,
Yeah.
like all these terrible things. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you're specifying on my behalf.
Yeah.
But you know, it's like, but to be in his mind with him and to be on his side because you're in his mind with him while he's justifying or dealing with his own insecurities, and you start to realize like, oh my gosh, he's dealing with feeling like he's not somehow living up to his faith, and so then he's over accentuating these certain things externally in order to try to like make up for or hide his own guilt or his own concerns for his quote unquote sins. And it was like, I don't know that I've ever read a section of a book that put me in that headspace, and I found it really challenging because I do kind of read, I guess I do kind of read books the way I read a play. Like I kind of put myself in the shoes of the people, probably out of habit from having been
Yeah.
an actor for
Yeah.
so long, you
Understandably.
know. And so it's challenging to like step into that character for that long stretch of the second book or second part of the book, just to go, oh my God, I'm rooting for him here. I'm thinking all these positive things about him here. And then he turns around and like, you know, sends these people away and they're going to go be tested on it. You know, it's just so Both as an actor and as a director, sleep is super important and really hard to get because our schedules are never the same. Sometimes we start at 4 in the morning, sometimes we start at noon, sometimes we start at midnight, and we work all night. So it's really important to find a way to fall asleep whenever I need to fall asleep. And I finally found a solution. I found Beam Dream Powder. It's incredible. Not only do they have incredible flavors and it works and it helps me sleep, but I wake up feeling super rested and refreshed and ready to go. There is a reason that the top business people and top athletes in the world are also using Beam Dream Powder. And I reached out to them and they have been super kind and have offered a discount for any of our listeners. So if you go to shopbeam.com/Jen's Bookshelf, you can get a discount. Get 35% off a subscription or 15% off a one-time purchase. Just use the code Jen's Bookshelf. Sleep has never tasted better. Where did you sort of find the, I don't know if the word is the confidence, the guts, I mean, there's some things I felt, to me, it felt incredibly brave to take this on, but it also just had my attention in such a intense way.
I I think that ultimately uh, I wanted to um, I wanted to make I wanted to write a systems novel, and I wanted the system to exert its or so I wanted to write like not four different novels, and like each part kind of has its own flavor. But I think the two leads into the systems novel, which is three and four. But I wanted the system to co-opt him and make it
Mm,
impossible for him to be a rational player or a moral player,
right.
even if theoretically he would want to like he wanted to guide the sort of Muslim or sort of the system into a place that is perhaps more accepting. He understood quite early on that is, one, not a possibility, and two, power is too seductive, and I wanted that power to both seduce him and seduce the reader. I think that
Mm,
I think that it's the job of the book to somewhat be seductive, and I wanted to I wanted so there's that intense guilt, and there's that intense guilt after he assaults his mentor,
yeah,
and he's unable to he keeps the lights off in the house, and he cleans it almost fastidiously over and
yeah.
over again until there's no evidence of his sin left, and he's he's left with just the sleeping body of somebody he raped effectively. And I even though this person had murdered his his friends,
Yeah, I
and
mean, it's
uh
complicated.
yeah, it's complicated. So there's that element of what, but I also wanted the West to be complicit. I knew I wanted to make sure that, because after the Russian invasion of Afghanistan, Afghanistan just became a um, the United States provided an unreal number of weapons and then just
Mm,
left them there, and then left Afghanistan. And then, of course, it led to the rise of the Taliban. But like beyond that, it also, but the conduit to Afghanistan was Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia has always kind of been this figure in global politics of like they pretend to bite the hand that feeds them, but then continuously takes all this aid and takes all this weaponry, and
mm,
they became a test kitchen of sorts. Like there were numerous chemical weapons being tested, and this is simply, I'm a conspiracy. I have a soft spot for conspiracists, but like
sure.
I think that there is naturally we outsource our depravity sometimes,
Yeah, I
and
felt
Saudi Arabia
that.
is all too willing.
Yeah, I felt that through the book in a way that was so interesting to me because I had never really thought about, I mean, you're aware of it listening to the news and reading articles, and it's like if you're someone who reads the Atlantic or the New Yorker or whatever, there's a certain amount of complicity that you see between the East and the West just through the news. But there was something much more crystal clear, I think, in the way that you were telling this story, where I started to realize, like, oh, these two hands are like held together in a way that is
Yes, exactly.
way, way more intertwined than my mind had ever really considered before. And also just some of the similarities of the way the sort of greed of capitalism had worn off on the East and how some of the extremity of the East have worn off on the West, and like it's all sort of gotten really mushy, it
Yeah,
seems.
I think that and that's why I wanted to draw the beginning or paint the beginning of a relationship that would end in sort of these futurist cities in the Middle East, right?
Mm,
There's like Dubai being one of the first, but like then you've got Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi, and
okay.
he's building this futurist city called Neom
Oh wow.
in the city is not all that invented. It's actually a city that MBS has wanted to build and is going to build with the help of McKinsey consultants, which is kind of the characters
Oh,
that my characters play. They became these agents of the state in the third part.
yeah.
They become completely complicit. They are entirely complicit in sort of this devastating utopian project. And if you think about James Baldwin quotes being used as marketing material for a city that is uh, um, and they want to be inclusive, they want to be sustainable,
Yeah.
they want all these things, but all of this um, it's it, it's a question, right? It is if if that project succeeds and it is a place in the Middle East where uh, women's rights, gay rights, like think of any of the topics that we generally stand for here in like
Yeah.
the liberal West. If that is a place where not only is it that, but it also contends with the ecological terror, or like sort of the um, climate change and like the ecological terror, is it necessarily a net evil if no one is being, other than the people who already live there who are being displaced, which is naturally a terrible thing.
Right.
But we do that all the time. Like we do
Yeah.
that every real estate project in New York but that isn't even attempting to be those things. Like we have 30
Yeah.
and they do jobs programs and they are attempted, like, so where do we draw our moral line in this new empire, which will naturally be um think they all were educated at the same places I was educated. They have no shortage of uh um scholarship in creating these cities. So I wanted to pose the question to the reader: is the cost really that much? Is it so terrible? Like, of course it is. Like, the natural feeling is like this guy is building
Yeah.
a hellscape. But if you think about it earnestly, uh, I don't know. And I wanted there to be that ambiguity. I wanted to live in that place.
Well, it goes back to
And
lens again, right? Like what lens is someone seeing that city through? Is it someone who's going to be helped by its establishment, or is it someone who's going to be hurt by it? Is it someone who's going to be alienated by, it's like it
yeah,
is kind of great. I see that in all sorts of things in politics, where you can see leaders around the world who the people in the country might be voting like crazy for this person because they're building bridges and they're building schools, they're doing all these things that make people feel like they're great, but then they turn around and they're like making it so there's no term limits in their constitution. It's
yes,
you
exactly.
know what I mean?
Yes,
You're like,
yes, exactly.
well, hang
Yeah.
on.
Where do we draw these compromises? Like,
Yeah.
like Modi, for example, in India, or Bolsonaro before, like you can find leaders or maybe not Putin. Putin's a separate, like, he's a nut. But I think that um you do have, like, where is our line? And I actually was wondering if I guess I thought about it a lot when I was writing it, and I didn't want it to lean too much in any direction as far as a moral argument. But I did think that the cost is sometimes I, it's it's interesting to watch our cognitive dissonance
Yeah.
to come into play, especially when reading like a novel like like in the names, I'm writing about Delillo for this
Oh yeah, so he's
for
on your
Harper. So
mind.
so he's on, yeah, so he wrote 17 novels, so like Jesus Christ.
Yes.
But it's I but he's unwittingly lured into the CIA. And he's working for the CIA without knowing it. And I think
Yeah.
that that's and I think that that is in some ways all of us.
A hundred
But
percent.
and I kind of wanted that feeling towards the end where you realize, oh, no matter what they do, this will succeed. Like
Yeah.
this progress is at all costs, and is it actually worth trying to stem that tide? And I don't know. I don't know
Yeah.
the answer to that question.
Yeah.
Not that I'm some
No,
I
but I mean,
you
I
know
feel like you express it in multiple layers in the novel. You know, even the question you're posing of like, how could Youseff or Imam Salim like figure out their relationship with their faith when their faith didn't want them to be gay, you know, didn't want them to be attracted
true.
to men. You know, it's like, how do you know that you are born with an attraction in a certain direction, and yet your faith is telling you that's wrong? And how do you devoutly be faithful because they were devoutly faithful, and yet at the same time we're also gay men, you know? So it's like they were in this sort of battle between their faith and their sexuality. They're also in a battle between their faith and their intellect at times, it feels like.
Yeah,
And you know,
entirely. Yeah.
and so that to me also felt like a bigger metaphor for anyone who's living in the West. It's like we're all living in a capitalistic situation where we don't even realize the way that we can continue to like think that way or continue to express ourselves in a way that supports that system. And yet what we think we believe might not agree with it. You know, it's like it's that dissonance you were talking about. I feel like it was built into the religious side of things in the novel as well as the
Absolutely.
systems side of things in the novel.
Yeah, I think I treated all of these things like individual systems. So like the family, a familial obligation,
Yeah.
religion, intellect, like all of them are systems that consume you in some way, or and then they reappropriate, or like which is the idea of brother, which is like each system he's kind of co-ops and becomes uh he's fed these things, and then that replaces the personality. And so like
Mm,
all of our loyalties, to whether it be to state, faith, each other, they are the not necessarily the death of personality, but to be able to hold all of those things is somewhat impossible, while remaining an individual. And so and especially for someone like Yusuf, who's the boundary between him and the world does not exist really. Like there's, because of whatever had happened to him as a child, like
yeah.
that test, that chemical is sort of he becomes like vellum, like he
Mm,
becomes the different, like there's no boundary. And I wanted to, and the more and more we are consumed by our political affiliations or whatever, we become less and less people in some ways. And um it's there's this great Calvino line that I'm going to butcher, but it's
hmm.
the city is not marked, but the city is understood by the distance between the legs of the hanged usurper and the ground. And
Oof.
that distance is kind of where I wanted to live for this book. And uh I yeah, and
What's that
so
like though? I mean, when you're it that it's there's a lot of, I should say, as I pose this question, there is a tremendous amount of hope and love and levity in the book, despite how many heavy subjects you tackle. So you found this interesting balance where, as a reader, I felt sort of held and brought in, even though you were asking the reader to go through a lot with these characters and to really dive into some heavy places. But what was that like for you to put yourself in a headspace where you're in that space you just explained for long enough to write a novel? You know, like was it outlined in a way where you felt like you had a structure that kind of carried you through the darker times, or did you just sort of have to live in the darker corners of things to find what you needed to find?
you kind of had to, like, it wasn't great. It was, I mean,
But
it
that's
wasn't so
great.
much, it wasn't great. It was despairing, and it was also, I also finished during the pandemic. I completed the novel during the pandemic, so there was a lot
Wow.
of just and especially in my part of New York, there was just, it was a lot of ambulances and a lot of, and I was visiting a friend in the hospital, so like there was a lot of just despondency, and um but I also think that it is impossible for a writer to, like, if I think that a lot of writing takes itself so seriously that it forgets that humor is like one of
Mm,
the central tenets of, like, think about Flannery O'Connor, or think about, again, Baldwin, like if you
yeah.
Toni Morrison, all of it's funny.
Yeah.
All of those books, all of the great writers you love, like, are funny. They're
Yeah.
naturally funny.
Yeah.
They're excellent conversationalists, and they can turn a phrase, and it's funny. And I wanted it to um I wanted it to have that humor no matter what, because I think ultimately when you are in those situations, there is nowhere to go but that mordant humor.
Yeah.
Um and I wondered a little bit about where uh, um, uh, I I think that I think that there's enough of it. I unfortunately, all the bad things that can happen do happen, and the only thing that remains is like sort of the state. But
Yeah.
you know, it's still funny when it always makes me like when one of the other consultants building this futurist city is like, hey, the guy who runs this is really good friends with Terrence Malick.
Oh
And
yeah.
it always makes me like, did you guys see Tree of Life? And I'm like, this
Genuine.
is,
I had to like go back because I laughed and then I went, wait, am I reading this right?
well, again, like all of, like Hollywood is similarly funded by, like, think about, like, in the same way that's other, like, if you think
I
about
was
funding.
just having this conversation, like arms dealers. I mean,
Yeah, exactly. It's, I remember I used to write I used to do punch up for late night and some other um some TV stuff,
sure.
and making things fun, like, you know, some of it's fun to do, some of it was not. Like, you don't really want to be on NCIS, you don't want to be making NCIS New Orleans hilarious, but it's but you got to pay the bills. And I do, like, Veep is hilarious, and Veep kind of understands its or anything Armando Iannucci works on understands that humor is necessary, and understands how corrupt, just how corrupt, and pokes at it, and
Yeah.
is and understands, like, what's, like, when it's kind of like you would, it's like walking across like the stage of a cheap theater, and the rickety backdrop starts to
The
waver, and you
waiver.
start to understand. Yeah, and you
Yeah.
start to understand, oh, this is a play, and also, like, you're taken out of it, and then when you look behind it, there's nothing there, and like there's
Yeah.
just that void. And I think that that's kind of uh what I wanted to show. Like, all of these things are somewhat interconnected. Like, there's no, of course he's friends. Of course he's a cinephile. Of course he loves
Right.
Fellini. Like, that, of course he does. Like,
Right.
um there's no shortage of like, taste does not preclude uh you know, evil, not evil necessarily, but doesn't preclude sociopathy.
Yeah. Or lack of morality.
Yeah.
um yeah, it's yes, I mean all of that is very present in the book, and it's also, again, it's why it's a super seductive read, because it makes you challenge. You're not only challenged by what's going on in the novel, but you're challenged by the ideas that it starts to provoke, and all of the connections that you start, the things you're saying, like, wait, who finances movies? And it's like you start to kind of look at all those pieces. In terms of just like the grand scope of how much you know about the East and Saudi Arabia and Afghanistan and the city that they're building. It's like, have you lived there, or is this pure just obsessive research?
It's a tandem. I did travel in the Middle East extensively after school, like, so for about a year and a half, and like I spent a lot of time in the Maghreb, and like and in parts of the Middle East, and I wanted to learn like sort of where my culture comes from and all those things, but I also saw a burgeoning society that was angry at or wanted to take the Western idea, because everybody was being educated in the West and moving back, and sort of like,
Mm.
instead of that brain drain that generally occurs in the East, where you have everybody just shuffle in, they've started to see America as a dead empire,
Huh.
and want to build a better version of it, or a facsimile that
Mm.
isn't quite so bereft in the Middle East, and in Asia. Like look at you don't see there's still a lot of brain drain in like Tunisia um, and and Morocco and stuff, but by and large, they're trying to build. And so I went, I did a lot, and I did a lot of research. Um, I consulted like a lot of books regarding sort of the Wahhabi, the the fundamentalist rise and fall, because there was a fundamentalist rise, which led to Al Qaeda and
Yeah.
all of these organizations, and then there were the people funding that who were also going to Harvard and then coming back and building these cities. So they were just marionettes for what was a larger project. Like they were just, if you think about it, in the I think I put it in the book, but like every time uh, there's an attack or like the fear of the attack, a congressperson will basically try and sign a blank check of aid to these countries. And that aid will naturally be spent in building sort of these projects that reconfigure their, like, these utopian ideas, and that's why that secular is like, they wanted to create a secular state. And
Wow.
I think that MBS is smart enough to know that you can't have an economy without half of your workforce. Like, women need to be able to work.
Yeah.
You need these, you need something more inclusive, and you need something more diverse, and you need to have labor that is paid appropriately. Like, you need all of these things in order to have what he's trying to build. And I think that I think what's also interesting is if America had not, if the West had not uh, sort of gone after like Gaddafi, and not that they, or Hussein, like they're not good leader, or they're not, but if
Right.
they were the ones keeping that sort of, that striving, the strivers and the royal families at bay a little bit, because they were still like sort of not madmen, but they were willing to, like, Saddam Hussein attacked Saudi Arabia. He was the only one crazy enough to do something like that.
Wow.
And uh but they were keeping the, but because they were also left leaning, like Gaddafi's Green Book, which was the Communist Manifesto for a pan-Arab state. I mean, he was crazy and of course violent and all these things, but I wonder if we had sort of supported a little bit more of those arguments, like sort of like social democracy, like those,
Yeah.
the CIA had, instead of created just, reservoirs. They created oil reservoirs and then expected everything to
Yeah.
work out, and it didn't. You gave a bunch of McKinsey consultants, like basically like hundreds of trillions of dollars to it's interesting. And I think that I I also like and I think the arts are similarly complicit too. Like I think that David's, like I think it was Hauser and Wirth is what the gallery I put in.
Hmm.
Uh, so like, of course, like if you think of the art collections of these scions
Yep.
of royal families in the Middle East, they own so much art, and that's a sinecure for, it becomes this place where you can just hide wealth.
Yeah.
uh
It's
and
been
then
like
they
that
show it
from the
off, and then they
beginning of
create.
time, all over the world. I
That's a
mean,
good
like
point.
the Medici
That's a good
family, and
point.
you know what I mean? Like that's one of the moves of people who have money, money and power, is to sort of, I don't know, bury some of it in the wealth of the arts that they're financing, and I don't know. It's been an ongoing cycle. As many of you know, I love my coffee. I love it in the morning. I love it after lunch. I love it after dinner. I've even been known to take my coffee in the shower with me, which my husband thinks is really weird. But he recently introduced me to Amigo Coffee Roasters, a farm-roasted coffee brand from El Salvador that's on a mission to improve coffee's traditional supply chain and give back to our friends who make it all possible. Amigo wants you to join their mission to seek quality and accountability in coffee in our communities and in our world. Visit www.amigoroasters.com, learn about their mission, but more importantly, you can support them by making a purchase. And for all you listeners, they have been kind enough to give you a 15% discount. Just go to www.amigoroasters.com and use the code Jen's Bookshelf at the checkout.
But then I do think that it becomes the role of the artist to be something like Celine and those guys, like bite the hand that feeds you a little bit. It has to be, but then it becomes this, they like being told that they're awful, and then they turn you into a clown almost, like it.
Oh, wow.
And so they like it's, and I make this joke and it's crass, but it's like they want to be choked during sex, and like it's this they don't want to die, but they want that feeling of somebody sort of
challenging them.
Tell me I'm
terrible.
Sort of,
wow. Wow. And so this is all, a lot of this is all from your experience of living in the Middle East for a stretch of time, of sort of witnessing all this.
Yeah, that and knowing enough people here where it's not that different. Where it's not, I do think that wealth has become do you think the Koch brothers care if you make fun of that? Do you think that the Whitney Whitney Biennial, where they did they showed how one of the board members was manufacturing grenades. Like he was on the board of a very specific weapons manufacturer, and they made a whole piece of, like, they did a whole installation about it.
Yeah.
Does it matter? Like, what is the purpose of that critique? You know, and you wonder if it's doing anything. And then yes, more people will know, and that is good. And but then you wonder if they're the ones approving it, then it clearly the cycle just continues.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Which is kind of one of the less optimistic, like less hopeful points, or less hopeful themes of the book. Like these systems will continue.
Yeah. I mean, I think what's hopeful about the book is that you see so much love within the families, and you see people's ability to forgive. You know, there's a whole section of the brothers having this opportunity to go on a true tear of vengeance once they know what actually happened to their parents, and their decision not to, you know, it's like there's a lot of hope in the goodness in humanity, you know what I mean, in terms of individuals making good decisions. I think that's where I felt the hopefulness. But like the New York Times review, which is incredible for your book, he said something like, sorry, I have little post-its all over my thing here, I want to find this, it was a great quote where I feel like he sums up, men die, movements wither, but corporations remain. It was like he sort of has summed up the intention. And I thought, oh, that really nails it. You know, like that really nails what you were saying in the end. And it's what we're up against. It's what we're all up against every day. But, you know, unless we all get up and do our best every day, we have no chance. You know?
Yeah, there's that. I think at the very end that when they're driving Youseff, who is now just a husk, like a sort of shell, and he's hugging his brother as he's saying farewell, and it's like holding a flood. And I think that that's the only way to describe, like, it's that it is that Fellini movie, I think like the one where the man is about to kill her, and she had fallen in love with him, and then she's walking back and she starts weeping. Forget the name of the movie.
I'm not sure.
She understood. I forget. But the idea that life is simply this, like there is no, life is life. Like it still has all of this beauty, even despite its like there's that built-in, and there's that built-in beauty to life that you can't run away from that either. That's as constant as our ability to self-abnegate and destroy ourselves is our ability to create and witness and sort of
Survive.
experience beauty.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
exactly.
so talk about the decision to have the sort of hallucinogenic or the hallucinated version of brother, in terms of, yeah, I mean, I loved this character. For anyone who hasn't read the book who's listening, there's a character called Brother who feels like a, I don't know, intellectual manifestation of certain moments in Youssef's life, or certain challenges that he faces in terms of his dissonance in his own mind between his sort of intellect and faith and family and all of the different things. But did you know when you set out to write this novel that touches on all these huge subjects and is so like planted in all of the real, very real things you've been talking about, to have this element that's slightly heightened, which is justified by what he went through? You know, I mean, like the hallucinations are definitely justified by the fact that he had been drugged when he was in utero, and that there would be some side effects to that. But I was just curious as to, like, was that a character that was always there in your mind, or was that something that started to manifest naturally as you were writing?
Well, I think that I I was of the mind that it is impossible for I've always been I've always been a big doppelganger double fan. I love those books. Like I love the
Yeah.
double, and I love because I think it's an old Freudian thing, but like it's it is impossible for one. I think especially for writers, it is hard, or at least for me, it is hard to both exist within the world and perceive myself existing within the world at the same time. And I think that one version of me exists and the other version of me perceives me existing, and I wanted a repository for that perception, or like a vessel for that
Yeah.
perception, and I wanted to put those perceptions inside this vessel. And in the same way that that consumption that I was talking, like it's what we are consumed by, and
Yeah.
those things that sort of or sublimated into and kind of also sublimate entirely our personality. I wanted to have a vessel for that feeling
Mm.
of the loss of self
Yeah.
and the lack of boundary. And so I knew I wanted a double, and I knew I didn't want to it it kind of came together because of research. I mean, a little bit of research and understanding that all of these diseases, like Alzheimer's, mad cow disease, all start with prions, and the CIA did do a lot of experiments on prion related weaponry
Oh, wow.
in the 60s and 70s. And so I just put two and two together, kind of, and I made, like, I wouldn't put it past us, but I
Yeah.
certainly I thought about what the consequences might be, and that allowed me a sort of rooted way to have the double,
Yeah.
uh, and to have that vessel. But yeah, I always wanted a double. I wanted the yeah, that vessel for everything else that, like, we cannot realize when we are out there living.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's incredibly effective. I found myself like, I would get frustrated by Brother, then I would get really like, I would miss Brother and I'd wish Brother was, you know, it was such an interesting thing to have a relationship with a hallucination as you read a book, you know, like, because I felt so many things toward this hallucination. You know, there would be times where it's like, yeah, okay, he's finally got Brother off his back, and I'd be like, but hang on, he might kind of need Brother. Like, where's
Yeah.
Brother right now? You know, like,
Yeah, he keeps him alive. I mean, like, I mean, my favorite chapter in this book, and that's is the birthday party at the very end. And Brother, because Youseff is all alone, Brother manifest, like, sort of creates a party for him with all of his
yeah,
family and his dead, you know, like his dead like his mother, his father, like everybody
yeah.
is there, and he can fill all of these vessels because these people have become him. and
Mm,
and I wanted that care to also be like, we even when we are imprisoned, like, in that way, and we are like, we are hollowing out, there's still so much life that we have experienced, and that can still be conjured.
yeah.
uh by our subconscious.
What this is a little bit of a pivot in the questions, but what is a day of writing look like for you? You know, like do you have rituals? Do you have a place you like to write? Is there like, do you have, you talked about this being a systems novel in certain ways. Like, do you have your own systems that you rely on to be productive and to find what you need to find to create something like this?
Besides crippling addictions, I would say I I do have so I had a system where I took my desk, I pinned it against the window in my apartment, and I wrote from there. And it was also the pandemic, and like that, it was where
Sure.
else would I go?
Yeah.
But I also, and I think for that book, that's what was necessary. And it would start at 6 and just go as long as I could go.
Wow.
And some days that would just be all day, and some days it would be, and I tried the Haruki Murakami thing where the running, and that didn't work for me at all.
Didn't work for you.
No, I also, but this one, because it's more rooted in other people, and more this new one, and so I find myself writing from bars, coffee, like not so much coffee shops. I can't do the coffee shop. I have to have like sort of, and I used to work service, so I kind of love watching. I just find all day restaurants, and I go, and now I know everybody, like all of them in my
Like the 24-hour restaurants.
yeah, exactly. And I sort of love watching the clatter,
Wow.
the clattering in the background, and everybody knows me now, so they just like bring coffee or whiskey depending on the time of day, and I just get to it. I think that it is an everyday thing for me. I also write longhand, so I don't write
Oh, interesting.
I don't write on the laptop. So I write longhand, and then I transcribe onto the laptop, and that's my first editorial process. So that's when I'm reading my own writing, that's when I edit for the first time.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
That makes so much sense.
So I have all these
Yeah.
notebooks. Yeah.
Wow. So everything you've ever, because you've been published a tremendous amount in all sorts of different publications, like, so everything has been handwritten and
Everything.
then transcribed, and that's your first sort of pass of editing. That's really interesting. I feel like that
Yep.
makes so much sense to me. I do a lot of like longhand. Yeah, even when I took notes in college and stuff, and then I would recopy them at the end
Yeah.
of the day, and that's
Yeah.
when it would sort of like sink into my mind. That makes a lot
Sure.
of sense. Did it take a while to kind of find that for yourself, or did it just naturally present itself as a system for you?
Yeah, I naturally kind of presented itself. I when I'm in a pinch, I'll use the laptop, but I generally the distraction of the screen I can't get past. And then I mean there are definitely downfalls to this method. And I was at a fellowship in Lisbon, and I lost my, like, I was on sort of the last third of my new novel, or like last quarter really, and so it was like,
Mhm.
I don't know, roughly 10,000 words, and I had my notebook, and I lost my notebook.
Oh my
And so now
God.
I didn't have it. And so now I mean, now I'm procrastinating, because getting it back, especially for me, it's not like I don't have like these. Sadie Smith has this beautiful, or this really there's some writers who and I'm going to butcher this as well, but there are some writers who are house builders, and um and their process, the end is just, they know what the house looks like, and now they're just rearranging furniture.
Right.
And that's one possible way. I'm not that kind of writer, and it's like I build the house as I write. And um and that is a downfall. But I also know that if I were to have to scroll at the end of, until the end of my document, I would spend so much time in the editorial process. Like I don't know that I would ever be able to finish anything. So
Yeah.
I think that it's freedom for me. It just feels a
It
lot
makes a
like
lot of
what I
sense.
would
Like
want.
I've just never heard anyone say that that's their system, but that makes so much sense. So my big question then is, what pen and what paper? Do you have like, you
Oh,
know,
okay. So yeah, for sure. Absolutely. It's right here, actually. I have a bunch. So I found this new one, actually. Uh, oh, sorry, not co-ed. So I used to use these like heavyweight German notebooks because I'm pretentious and an asshole. But it was too heavy and I didn't like this leather bound sort of thing. And then I found this Japanese brand Midori that I like, one of the only, so it's, and I use graph paper, like as opposed to, so like, so like it's all just graphs. It's like, and
Wow.
so I find the abundance. So initially it was dot grid, and now it's graph. So I find the abundance of structure to be freeing.
Yeah.
Almost like it allows for experimentation, whereas the lines are for psychopaths. I can't do a fucking line to save my life. And I yeah. So and so this brand Midori, and the reason I like it so much is it opens flat. It just, there's no
Oh,
so
there's
like in
no
the way
weird
that
little bump.
there's no weird bump, so it just opens completely flat, and I don't have to so I can go across the page and just keep going. And like if I want a sentence, and this is like this weird Olympian constraint I gave myself for this next book, where there's this man wakes up in different cities every morning in search of an inheritance, and each day when he goes back to his home, there's one sentence that runs across the page onto the new margin, onto a blank page, and then runs into the first paragraph of the next chapter, and it works seamlessly in both those
Oh,
paragraphs. And
wow.
so it kind of functions as a road between these cities, or that's the idea.
Yeah.
And of course it's fucking impossible, but like but this notebook allows that sort of
Yeah,
process
the
to
dotted
happen.
lines
Yeah,
actually allow
yeah,
that, right? And the
exactly.
flatness. And so, and the pen, you have a special pen that
Oh,
you
so
love?
I'm so bad at losing things. So I everybody tells you gotta have a pen. So no, I have the Pilot Better retractable fine. Like it's a 0.5. It's good. I pen for $10. I don't have to worry about losing them. I lose them wherever I go, and I don't feel bad about them. But I've had nice pens in the past that I've lost and then felt miserable
Oh
about.
yeah, but it's more just like, I don't know. I feel like the texture of the page and the way the pen moves on the texture of the page is
Exactly.
such a big deal for me, where it's like,
Yeah, exactly.
there's certain, I'm journal and I've journaled for many, many years. And, there's mornings I'll grab the wrong pen and I'm immediately like, ah,
The
nah.
worst. It's the worst. It's
It's not
worse.
about how fancy
It's
it is.
grotesque.
It's not about how
Yep.
expensive it is. It's just, does this pen move right on this paper?
No, like if it's too thin, or if the point is too sharp, it's scratching the page,
Yeah. And
which
if it's
feels
too
like death.
fast, then you can't quite, your
Yeah,
handwriting doesn't look like your handwriting anymore. And yeah,
exactly, exactly. Not
yeah,
that my handwriting is legible at all, anyway,
yeah.
but um I completely agree. I think that it is a personal relationship, and it changed. Like um a friend of mine, Brandon Taylor, he talks to me
I
about,
love Brandon Taylor.
yeah,
We interviewed him last season for the book club.
oh really? Yeah,
He's
he's great.
wonderful.
He's a beautiful person.
He's
And he's funny as
spectacular.
hell.
I feel like
Yeah,
he
he's funny as hell.
glows.
Yeah, he's great. I mean, he was telling me, he was giving me this spiel once, and we were at a restaurant, and he was just like, eventually you've got to get to fountain. He uses these like beautiful fountain pens, and I'm like, yeah, okay, all right, Brandon, you like, all right. After I win the Booker, I'll get a fountain pen. How about that? I
That's
just,
amazing.
yeah, he's really sweet. But and also Hernan Diaz, he's another one with he was my mentor for a while, and
Oh, great.
he has a very specific pen, and he's had this pen for many years, and he uses it, and I just don't know how they keep them. But then
Yeah.
again, they have like much more stable lives than I think that their lives are just better than mine. I
They have like a
just,
little box, like a special box for their pen,
yeah, and
probably.
they write from a nice off, and like it's all right, fine. I'm writing from like a shitty bar, so like it's
Yeah.
like, um but yeah, I have that's my pen, and this is my new notebook. And I also I have no compunction. I beat up my books pretty bad. Like I
Mm.
write in them. I like whatever I'm reading, I'm constantly writing in them. So I like the margin notes are really important for me. And I mean, I also write on, so I couldn't find, so of course I couldn't find the notebook when I was abroad. and I couldn't find a notebook that approximated the notebook. And of course,
Oh,
I'm
right.
so persnickety that I'm just like, well, I can't write without these like, who am I? Like, I hate this. And so then I'm like, okay, you know what? I found it, and I found the first time I could get going again was on one of those vomit bags in an airplane, and I collected 6 of them,
That's
and
unexpected.
and I just wrote on the, and I still have it. I have to transcribe them at some point, but I still have them. And
That's
napkin, I mean, of course, napkins, but like, yeah, yeah,
there you
vomit
go.
bags.
I mean, we have
They're
covered
the texture
everything.
of the paper.
We have covered everything from all of the world's problems to writing with the right pen on a vomit bag. So
Yeah, that's
I
true.
feel like
I don't know what those bags are called, but yeah, yeah.
we've really succeeded today, Zane.
Perfect.
Well, we are at our time limit, but thank you again for just hanging and talking. You're fascinating. This book is so spectacular. It hits
Thank you
on
so
so many
much.
thing and I truly, I really mean it. Like, I learned so much from this book. I've learned from talking to you today. Like, the depth of your knowledge and the detail with which you've really followed your curiosities through all of these subjects is fascinating. And I feel like the world would be a better place if everyone took the time to read this book. So
Oh, that's very kind of you.
thank you so much for joining us, and keep us posted. Let us know when you have your next book. We want
Yeah,
to
I
we
will.
want to read that book and talk about that one too.
Of course.
All right, take care.
All right, bye.